Hey everyone, in this video we're gonna continue with the pipeline setup and gonna import the pipeline, set up the connections and get it ready to run. In my example I will be using the release pipelines. You will find the release pipelines in the link of the article. They are also in the GitHub itself, so I got the page open. In the main code view, you will see a folder called Azure Pipeline Template, and there you will find the templates and you can download them. Currently there are only 3, there might be more added. I will download the one for the deployment and for export and apply. So the goal is that we implement the pipeline. For deployment means you go from a lower environment to an upper environment and want to deploy the latest map versions. And the second one is, let's say you restore a database from production to your UAT system and you want to apply the exact same versions like on production, then it will take a snapshot of the production maps and applies it into the new environment. Let's quickly download this one. I don't know if there's an easier way. I just go to raw, save as, and then save it here somewhere. Export and apply. Right. Now we go back to your ADO. I go to release pipelines, new, and then import release pipeline. And then we can select the file again. I'll take the deployment first. Or maybe the export and apply. That works. Now, this is imported and it has multiple steps which we will go through. The deployment import didn't work because of the file. I will fix the file after the video and then you will be able to import it. I will go ahead from this file because it's not any different, except that there's an extra step to apply it to a new environment. So let's go first through the settings from top to bottom. So first of all, you go into the stage. So 1 job, 6 tasks. You go to the top. The agent pool, what you select is Azure Pipelines or whatever host you have available. Most important is that it's running on Windows because Windows has by default the Edge installed, which it needs to run. And you can use here Windows latest. As a second step, that's the key vault connection. You can select your subscription, what you have available, and then you need to go and authorize access. So just click on deauthorize and then wait. There we go, so it was authorized, so the service connection was created in the backend. And then you can also drop down and select your key vault you would like to have. I have just this one, you might have multiple, so just select the one which you need. As the secret filter, you can keep it as a wildcard. So what that means, it takes everything in the key vault whatever secret you have stored and adds the name as a variable which you can use in the next pipeline steps. So whatever name you chose, so if we go back to the key vault, so I have password, PAT, and username, these will be variables you can then use in your pipeline. I tick the box, make secrets available to the whole job. That makes sure that I can reuse them in every single step and not only in the next step. Let's just go to through the steps what it's doing. To download the latest release DW automation, it actually goes into the GitHub repo, into the releases, downloads the latest release, and unpacks it and puts it into the right folder. The next step, what it does, it puts in the local configurations we created in the local repo. For that, it takes the personal access token to clone the repo into this machine, basically where it's running on, and merges the release, what it previously downloaded, and the config files and puts them into the execution folder. For this, cloning the local config file, you also have variables, which I want you to adjust. You have your DevOps organization, your repo, and your project. So please adjust these names, otherwise it will probably fail on this step. Now the next step is, or the next steps are quite simple. First, it restores the .NET Core SDK 6.0, which it needs to run. And the next step is then to actually run the script itself. What you will see here, so it runs the DW helper cmd.exe and puts in the arguments into it. So in this case, it puts in the username, and this is the variable coming from the key vault. Also the key vault, and here this is a variable you can put. I was adding as a pipeline variable, but however you put it, you just need to make sure it's running on that command line. The run mode here is export, because it's apply and export and apply. Only the status in running. The export options would be precise, so it's taking the actual author and the versions, and this is the config file it should export it to. So this config file is then needed, which we then pick up in the next step to apply to the new environment. It's just a temporary. As soon as that run is finished, all the files will be gone from that machine. If you still want to check in that file somewhere, you would probably need to add another PowerShell step where you take that temporary config file, give it a proper name, and then check it into your local repo. That's something you would need to add manually. As a next step, we then apply it to the new environment. So in this case, we also pass in username and password, and then I have another environment variable, which is the to-fno environment and the run mode deployment. And here I pass in the same configuration file, which I created in the step before. So what happens in this step, it's creating the configuration file under this name. And here it's taking the configuration file which I created under this name. The variables itself, let's have a quick look. This is the config name. I made this available at release time, so you could potentially change this. Also, the from FNO environment and the to FNO environment are available for release. So whenever you create a release, you can specify these two. Now, this pipeline would be just an example. How you set it up then actually on your environment is entirely up to you. This just gives you an idea how you can set this pipeline up. We can now, for the deployment itself, we can take a copy of this, and I'll show you what is then actually the difference. It's not a lot, so I'm going to save this. Go back to all pipelines. I clone this pipeline, just give it another name for deployment. Then pretty much what I'm going to do is I delete one of these steps. I delete now the export config, or I disable it. I rename this, so all the other steps are remaining the same. It still takes the key vault, it still downloads the release and extracts it. It still merges the local configuration files with your current execution, and then it's running the deployment itself. The only thing what I'm going to replace is the variables. I'm going to call it FNO environment, and I don't need this one. And I replace this one. Run mode is deployment, and -C I will put in the variable as config name, so you can specify it during runtime. And that's it. You can still add multiple parameters like no solutions or other command line parameter. The exact syntax you can try out on your local machine as well by just using a command line and passing the variables. Additionally, if you go back to the GitHub, into the wiki itself, you will find a section using the command line. And here you have all the parameters available, which you can then use, as well as some examples. All of these can be then also leveraged in the pipeline itself. I'll save this pipeline. And that's pretty much it with the setup. You can still import the start, stop, and pause one. And then in the next video, we're gonna do some example runs for these releases.